I owe very much to many different teachers who I was lucky uh, taught me to imagine a sense of possibilities for myself and for how I could improve the world that I would not have imagined on my own. I'd like to talk about one of those teachers who taught me not in the classroom, but in many other ways in the school that she had founded, the École Jean-Jacques Rousseau in Venezuela, the country where I grew up. Clara Chirick was a French teacher who came to Venezuela as a political refugee. And the school that she created was a wonderful school in many ways. It was a very small school, had no more than 300 students, and it was so small that the classrooms held two grades in the same class, and one teacher would have to teach two grades at the same time. It was a beautiful school with a big courtyard, all kinds of tropical trees. I remember especially the mango trees. Out of one of those mango trees on the courtyard of the school was a big bell, which Madame Chiric rang every morning to make us line up to then proceed to our classes and start the day. Madame Chiric was a very involved woman in the life of that school. She visited the classrooms often. She came every Friday and took all the children in the classroom to the school library, which she loved. You could tell that she loved those books. She would open up these boxes that had just arrived from France with new books. And she always gave us a choice about what we wanted to read that week. There was no choice over the fact that we're going to be reading something that week for pleasure, but we could choose what we wanted to read. And she would come the next Friday and ask us what we had thought about the book. She did a lot in that small school with very limited resources to create very many opportunities for children to discover different talents that they had. There was a big emphasis in the arts in the school. And we put together as a school a huge series of theatrical performances to celebrate the end of the school year. And all the parents would come to those performances, and the kids would design, would draw drawings that would go in front of the program of the plays that would be performed that year. What I remember is that one day, as the school vacation was ending at the end of the summer, and I was to begin 5th grade in that school, my mother told me we had to go and say goodbye to Madame Chiric because she was leaving the country. And so I went that day, and this woman who I knew to be wise and beautiful and caring and just was really very distraught, very sad. And she explained in ways I could only partly understand that day that she and her husband had been accused of some terrible things and they had to leave the country in very little time. So she was closing down the school that she had founded a decade earlier. And I remember we went to that school library for the last time, and she gave me 2 books as a gift. And I told her that I would come back next Friday to return the books, and I had a hard time understanding when she said, "Don't come back because there will not be anyone here. The school will not be here next Friday. You can keep the books. They're a gift to you." So in 2006, I had an opportunity to visit Paris. I knew they had gone back to France, but I had lost all contact with her and with all the other teachers that taught in that school. And in 2006, I had to go to Paris to give a lecture at UNESCO, and I went online and checked out the phone book and typed her name, and here came up her telephone number. And so I called her up, and I asked her, "Are you Clara Chiric?" She said, "Yes." I asked her, "Were you the principal of the École Jean-Jacques Rousseau?" And she went very quiet. And I said, "I was one of your students." And she said, "C'est pas possible." So we agreed to meet, and Wednesday of that week, I showed up in her apartment. And my heart was pounding with excitement as I waited for her to open the door. And the woman who opened the door did not look at all like the woman I remember. I remember my principal as tall, strong, young. And Madame Chiric was very short. She was blind of one eye. She had 86 years old at that time. But we spent a wonderful 3 hours. She brought out boxes, shoe boxes she had saved with copies of those programs that had been designed by students with a theater play. She had kept photographs of every class, every grade, every year she had had the school with all the kids and their teachers. And it was a very happy moment for me to re-encounter my teacher. And I said, you know why I have come? I've come to ask you two questions. One, why did you leave? And two, why did you create the school? And so she explained to me first why she had created the school. Madame Chirick was married to a union organizer in France. And when the Nazis came to Paris, they detained him. They detained him because of his political activities and because he was Jewish. And she didn't know exactly what was going to happen to him. They knew they would put those people on trains, but she anticipated it wasn't good. So she managed with a friend of her husband to help him escape that detention center. And she knew, she had the instinct, that they had to leave France and go as far away as they could. That's how they ended up in Venezuela. And she knew that he was going to continue with his political work, and she had to earn a living. So she created this school. And I asked her, what was your goal in creating that school? She said it was very simple. I had lived through the horrors of World War II, where people essentially caused much violence to others because of their perceived differences over identities, religious identities, national identities. And I wanted to create a school that would help you and your classmates understand what it was like to be just like everybody else. And I knew that to do that, I needed to create a school that would have girls and boys, that would have children of different religious backgrounds, of different social backgrounds, of different racial backgrounds. And I just hope that in giving you an opportunity to be with others, you would discover that you had a lot more in common with them than what set you apart. And I realized at that moment something I really hadn't reflected upon, which was that I had been very lucky to begin my education for the first 4 years of my schooling in a school that was very, very diverse, and where in sharing the joy of going to the library, putting together a theatrical performance, working with our teachers in our classrooms, across all those lines of differences, I had taken for granted that this is how the world was, that the world was a place that had all kinds of people, and that we could work together along those lines of difference in achieving goals bigger than ourselves. She said, the reason I had to leave is because my husband had continued with his political work. He published a newspaper that probably distributed 300 copies in a local university, but his ideas were politically unpopular at the time. And when the political police found out about his work, they raided the school. He was lucky that he was in France at the time, but she went to the French embassy and she said, what should we do? And their advice was, you probably should leave the country, because at this time, given the work your husband has been doing, he will most likely end up in jail, and you may end up in jail as well. And she said, I had suffered too much already through World War II to want to go through that again, so I had to leave. So as I reflected on the courage of that woman, a refugee, who arrived in a country where she didn't know anybody, where she could have just taken up a job at the only existing French school. It was a religious school that taught only boys of a particular social background. But instead of doing that, she had the courage, with very limited resources, to do something different, to create a school that was aligned with, I think, a more humane vision of what the world could be and of the role that we could play in it, in working with others alongside of differences so we could bring peace to this world. I owe much to her, to Clara Chirick, and to the teachers that she brought together in that school to teach us those lessons.